Welcome back to Ethereal Journey. In our last episode, we explored the profound insights of Pythagoreanism, a school of thought that intertwined mathematics, mysticism, and a quest for cosmic harmony. Today, we continue our journey through the annals of ancient philosophy by delving into the Eleatic School. Founded by Parmenides in the early 5th century BCE, this school challenged conventional thinking with radical ideas about being, reality, and the nature of existence. Join us as we unravel the profound and paradoxical teachings of the Eleatic philosophers, whose ideas continue to resonate through the corridors of philosophical thought. Chapter 1: Parmenides and the Way of Truth. It is the same thing that can be thought and that can be. Parmenides. Our journey into the Eleatic School begins with its founding figure, Parmenides of Elea. Parmenides, who flourished in the early 5th century BCE, revolutionized philosophical thought by introducing a radically new approach to understanding reality. He proposed that true knowledge could only be achieved through rational thought, fundamentally questioning the reliability of sensory perception. This bold claim laid the groundwork for the Eleatic School, distinguishing it from the empirical methods of the Ionian philosophers who preceded him. The subject of Parmenides' philosophy centers on the nature of being and reality. In his seminal work on nature, Parmenides presents his ideas in the form of a poetic dialogue between himself and a goddess who reveals profound truths about existence. This approach not only highlights the metaphysical themes central to his thought but also frames his philosophy within a mythical and mystical context, emphasizing the distinction between mere opinion and genuine knowledge. The core problem that Parmenides addresses is the nature of being itself. What is the fundamental nature of reality, and how can we know it? To formulate the problem, Parmenides distinguishes between the way of truth and the way of opinion. The way of truth is a path of rigorous logical reasoning that reveals the immutable and eternal nature of being. In contrast, the way of opinion is based on sensory perception and everyday experience, leading to false beliefs and illusions. Parmenides argues that only the way of truth can lead to genuine knowledge, challenging the very foundations of pre-Socratic thought and paving the way for future philosophical inquiry. Way of truth begins with a profound assertion: what is, and what is not, is not. This statement forms the bedrock of his metaphysical framework, asserting that only being truly exists, while non-being is an impossibility. According to Parmenides, for something to be thought or spoken of, it must exist. Thus, the very act of thinking or speaking presupposes the existence of its subject. This principle leads to the conclusion that being is the only reality, and non-being cannot be conceived or expressed. Building on this foundation, Parmenides argues that being is unchanging, eternal, and indivisible. If being could change, it would imply the existence of non-being, which is impossible. Therefore, true being must be timeless and unchanging, existing beyond the realm of birth and decay. This perspective stands in stark contrast to the views of other pre-Socratic philosophers who emphasized change and multiplicity as fundamental aspects of reality. For Parmenides, change is an illusion, and the apparent diversity of the world is a deception of the senses. Furthermore, Parmenides posits that being is a continuous, undivided whole. If being were divided, it would imply the presence of non-being between the parts, contradicting the principle that non-being cannot exist. Thus, being is one and indivisible, rejecting the notion of a pluralistic universe. This monistic view asserts that all of reality is a single, unified entity, challenging the common-sense perception of a world composed of distinct and separate objects. Through this logical reasoning, Parmenides establishes a metaphysical framework that denies the reality of change and multiplicity, asserting the primacy of an unchanging and eternal being. In contrast to the way of truth, the way of opinion represents the beliefs and perceptions of ordinary experience. Parmenides acknowledges that humans naturally perceive a world of change, diversity, and multiplicity. However, he argues that these perceptions are fundamentally flawed, rooted in the deceptive nature of the senses. According to Parmenides, sensory perception leads to false opinions and illusions, preventing us from attaining true knowledge. The goddess in Parmenides' poem describes the way of opinion as a path filled with errors and contradictions. She explains that mortals rely on their senses to navigate the world, forming beliefs based on appearances rather than reality. This reliance on sensory perception creates a distorted view of the world, where change and multiplicity seem real but are actually illusory. Parmenides challenges us to question these appearances and seek the deeper truth that lies beyond the realm of the senses. One of the key examples Parmenides uses to illustrate the deceptive nature of the senses is the phenomenon of birth and death. In everyday experience, we observe things coming into being and passing away, leading us to believe in the reality of change. However, Parmenides argues that this belief is based on a misunderstanding. True being, he asserts, cannot come into existence or cease to exist, as this would imply a transition between being and non-being, which is impossible. Therefore, the concepts of birth and death are mere illusions, masking the eternal and unchanging nature of reality. Parmenides' philosophy represents a profound shift in the history of thought, challenging the assumptions of his predecessors and contemporaries. By asserting the primacy of rational thought over sensory perception, he laid the groundwork for the development of metaphysics and epistemology. His ideas forced philosophers to grapple with the nature of reality and the limits of human knowledge, setting the stage for future debates and discoveries. The influence of Parmenides extends far beyond the Eleatic School. His emphasis on the unchanging nature of being resonated with Plato, who incorporated similar ideas into his theory of forms. Aristotle, though critical of Parmenides' monism, acknowledged the importance of his insights and sought to address the issues he raised in his own work. Even in modern philosophy, Parmenides' questions about the nature of existence continue to inspire and challenge thinkers. The influence of Parmenides extends far beyond the Eleatic School. His emphasis on the unchanging nature of being resonated with Plato, who incorporated similar ideas into his theory of forms. Aristotle, though critical of Parmenides' monism, acknowledged the importance of his insights and sought to address the issues he raised in his own work. Even in modern philosophy, Parmenides' questions about the nature of existence continue to inspire and challenge thinkers. Chapter 2: Zeno's Paradoxes. The arrow neither moves nor is at rest. Zeno of Elea. As we delve deeper into the Eleatic School, we encounter Zeno of Elea, a devoted disciple of Parmenides. Born around 490 BCE, Zeno is best known for his paradoxes, which he crafted to defend and elaborate on Parmenides' radical ideas. While Parmenides established the foundational concepts of Eleatic philosophy, Zeno sought to reinforce these ideas by challenging common-sense notions of motion, change, and plurality. Zeno's paradoxes have puzzled and intrigued philosophers for centuries, illustrating the profound and often counterintuitive nature of Eleatic thought. The subject of Zeno's philosophy centers on the apparent contradictions and absurdities that arise when we accept the reality of motion and plurality. Through a series of thought experiments, Zeno aimed to demonstrate that these commonly accepted notions lead to logical inconsistencies, thereby supporting Parmenides' assertion that true being is unchanging and indivisible. The core problem Zeno addresses is the reliability of sensory perception and the logical coherence of everyday experience. To formulate the problem, Zeno presents paradoxes that challenge our intuitive understanding of space, time, and motion. These paradoxes force us to reconsider the nature of reality and question whether our perceptions can be trusted. By highlighting the contradictions inherent in the common-sense view of the world, Zeno strengthens the Eleatic argument that reality is fundamentally different from how it appears to our senses. The paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. One of the most famous of Zeno's paradoxes is the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. In this thought experiment, Achilles, the swift Greek hero, races a tortoise that has been given a head start. Zeno argues that Achilles can never overtake the tortoise because, by the time he reaches the point where the tortoise started, the tortoise has moved a little further ahead. This process repeats infinitely, creating an endless series of steps that prevent Achilles from catching the tortoise. Zeno's paradox challenges the notion of continuous motion and the divisibility of space and time. By breaking down the race into an infinite series of smaller steps, Zeno demonstrates that the concept of motion leads to logical absurdities. If we accept that space and time can be infinitely divided, then motion itself becomes paradoxical, as Achilles can never complete an infinite number of steps in a finite amount of time. This paradox highlights the limitations of sensory perception and the difficulties in reconciling our intuitive understanding of motion with logical reasoning. Zeno's argument suggests that our senses deceive us into believing in the reality of motion, while reason reveals its inherent contradictions. By exposing these contradictions, Zeno reinforces Parmenides' claim that true being is unchanging and that the multiplicity and motion we perceive are mere illusions. The arrow paradox. Another of Zeno's famous paradoxes is the arrow paradox, which questions the nature of motion and time. In this thought experiment, Zeno argues that an arrow in flight is, at any single instant, motionless. Since time is composed of individual instants, and at each instant the arrow occupies a fixed position, it follows that the arrow is always at rest. Therefore, Zeno concludes that motion is an illusion. The arrow paradox challenges our understanding of time as a continuous flow. By breaking time into discrete instants, Zeno shows that motion cannot be explained as a series of still moments. This paradox forces us to reconsider the nature of time and question whether our perception of motion corresponds to reality. Zeno's argument implies that if we rely solely on sensory perception, we are led to believe in a false conception of motion. Furthermore, the arrow paradox emphasizes the distinction between appearance and reality. While we perceive the arrow as moving, logical analysis reveals that this perception is fundamentally flawed. Zeno's paradoxes illustrate the Eleatic view that true knowledge can only be attained through reason, not through the deceptive evidence of the senses. By demonstrating the contradictions inherent in the common-sense view of motion, Zeno supports Parmenides' argument that reality is unchanging and indivisible. Zeno's paradoxes have left an indelible mark on the history of philosophy, challenging thinkers to grapple with the nature of motion, space, and time. His thought experiments have sparked numerous debates and discussions, influencing the development of mathematical and philosophical theories. Zeno's work underscores the importance of logical reasoning in the pursuit of truth, reinforcing the Eleatic commitment to rational inquiry. The paradoxes of Zeno highlight the limitations of sensory perception and the need for a deeper understanding of reality. By exposing the contradictions in our intuitive beliefs, Zeno encourages us to question the reliability of our senses and seek a more coherent and consistent view of the world. His arguments emphasize the value of critical thinking and the need to go beyond appearances in our quest for knowledge. As we reflect on Zeno's contributions to the Eleatic School, we recognize the enduring significance of his paradoxes. They serve as a reminder of the complexity and subtlety of philosophical inquiry, challenging us to reconsider our assumptions and explore new ways of understanding the world. In our next chapter, we will continue our journey through Eleatic philosophy by examining the contributions of Melissus of Samos, who further developed and expanded the ideas of Parmenides and Zeno. Chapter 3. Melissus and the Infinite One. What is eternal, infinite, and one. Melissus of Samos. Our exploration of the Eleatic School continues with Melissus of Samos, an influential figure who built upon and expanded the ideas of Parmenides and Zeno. Born in the early 5th century BCE, Melissus was not only a philosopher but also a military leader, commanding the Samian fleet during the Samian War. His contributions to Eleatic philosophy are significant, as he introduced new arguments and refined existing ones to further develop the concept of an eternal, infinite, and unchanging reality. Melissus' work represents a crucial evolution in Eleatic thought, solidifying the school's metaphysical framework. The subject of Melissus' philosophy revolves around the nature of being and the concept of infinity. Unlike Parmenides, who presented his ideas through poetic dialogue, Melissus approached philosophy with a more straightforward, logical argumentation. His primary goal was to reinforce the Eleatic view that true being is unchanging and indivisible, while also introducing the notion of infinity to explain the nature of reality. The problem Melissus addresses is the apparent contradiction between the finite nature of human experience and the infinite nature of true being. To formulate the problem, Melissus argues that if being is truly eternal and unchanging, it must also be infinite in extent. He contends that anything finite would imply boundaries and limitations, which contradict the Eleatic principle of an unchanging and indivisible reality. By introducing the concept of infinity, Melissus challenges us to rethink our understanding of existence and confront the limitations of our sensory perceptions and finite experiences. Melissus begins his argument by asserting that true being is eternal, without beginning or end. He reasons that if being had a beginning, it would have arisen from non-being, which is impossible. Similarly, if being had an end, it would pass into non-being, which is equally inconceivable. Therefore, true being must be eternal, existing beyond the confines of time and change. This idea builds upon Parmenides' assertion that being is unchanging and highlights the timeless nature of reality. In addition to eternity, Melissus introduces the concept of infinity to describe the extent of being. He argues that true being cannot be finite, as finitude implies boundaries and limitations that contradict the nature of an unchanging reality. If being were finite, it would have edges or limits where it transitions to non-being, which is impossible according to Eleatic principles. Therefore, true being must be infinite, extending without limit in all directions. This notion of infinity challenges our finite perceptions and compels us to consider the boundless nature of reality. Furthermore, Melissus posits that the infinite nature of being also implies its indivisibility. If being were divisible, it would consist of parts separated by non-being, contradicting the principle that non-being cannot exist. Therefore, true being is a continuous, undivided whole, encompassing all of existence without any division or separation. This argument reinforces the Eleatic view that reality is a single, unified entity, fundamentally different from the multiplicity and diversity perceived by our senses. Building on the ideas of Parmenides, Melissus also rejects the concepts of change and plurality. He argues that if being is truly unchanging and indivisible, then the apparent changes and multiplicity we observe in the world must be illusions. According to Melissus, change implies a transition from one state to another, which would involve non-being. Since non-being is impossible, true being must be unchanging, and any perceived changes are mere appearances, not reflections of reality. Melissus further contends that plurality, or the existence of multiple distinct entities, is incompatible with the nature of true being. If reality were composed of multiple entities, each would have to be separate from the others, implying the presence of non-being between them. This contradicts the Eleatic principle that non-being cannot exist. Therefore, true being must be one, a singular, unified entity without any division or separation. This monistic view challenges the common-sense perception of a world composed of diverse and distinct objects. By rejecting change and plurality, Melissus reinforces the Eleatic commitment to an unchanging and indivisible reality. His arguments emphasize the limitations of sensory perception and the need for rational thought to uncover the true nature of existence. Melissus' contributions to Eleatic philosophy deepen our understanding of the metaphysical principles established by Parmenides, and challenge us to reconsider our assumptions about the nature of reality. Melissus' philosophical contributions have had a lasting impact on the development of metaphysical thought. His arguments for the eternal, infinite, and indivisible nature of being have influenced subsequent philosophers and helped shape the trajectory of Western philosophy. By introducing the concept of infinity, Melissus expanded the Eleatic framework and provided new insights into the nature of reality. The legacy of Melissus can be seen in the works of later philosophers, including Plato and Aristotle, who grappled with the issues he raised. Plato's theory of forms, for example, reflects the Eleatic emphasis on the unchanging and eternal nature of true reality, while Aristotle's metaphysical inquiries address the challenges posed by Melissus' arguments. The influence of Eleatic thought, as developed by Melissus, continues to resonate in contemporary philosophical discussions about the nature of existence and the limits of human knowledge. As we conclude our exploration of Melissus and the Infinite One, we are reminded of the profound and enduring questions that Eleatic philosophy raises. The concepts of eternity, infinity, and indivisibility challenge us to look beyond the surface of our everyday experiences and seek a deeper understanding of reality. Chapter 4: The Eleatic Influence on Plato and Aristotle. Philosophy begins in wonder. Plato. As we continue our exploration of the Eleatic School, we turn our attention to its profound influence on two of the most celebrated figures in Western philosophy, Plato and Aristotle. These philosophers, who lived in the classical era of ancient Greece, were deeply affected by the Eleatic principles established by Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus. Their works reveal how Eleatic thought provided a foundation for their own philosophical inquiries, shaping the trajectory of Western philosophy for centuries to come. The subject of this chapter is the integration and transformation of Eleatic ideas within the philosophical systems of Plato and Aristotle. Both thinkers grappled with the Eleatic emphasis on the unchanging nature of reality, though they approached the problem from different angles. Plato's theory of forms and Aristotle's metaphysical inquiries each reflect a response to Eleatic challenges, demonstrating the lasting impact of Eleatic thought on their philosophies. The core problem they address is reconciling the Eleatic notion of an unchanging reality with the empirical evidence of a dynamic and pluralistic world. To formulate the problem, we must understand how Plato and Aristotle both sought to bridge the gap between the eternal and the temporal, the one and the many. While Plato embraced the Eleatic notion of an unchanging reality through his theory of forms, Aristotle critiqued and built upon these ideas to develop his own metaphysical framework. Together, their works illustrate the enduring struggle to understand the nature of being and the limitations of human perception. Plato, a student of Socrates and teacher of Aristotle, was profoundly influenced by the Eleatic emphasis on an unchanging reality. In his theory of forms, Plato posits that the true essence of reality lies not in the mutable physical world but in eternal, immutable forms or ideas. These forms represent the perfect, unchanging archetypes of all things that exist in the material world. For example, the form of a circle represents the perfect concept of a circle, while any physical circle is merely an imperfect copy. The influence of Eleatic thought is evident in Plato's distinction between the world of forms and the world of appearances. Like Parmenides, Plato believed that true knowledge could only be attained through reason, not sensory perception. The material world, in Plato's view, is a realm of becoming, characterized by constant change and imperfection. In contrast, the world of forms is a realm of being where true reality resides. This dualistic framework echoes the Eleatic separation of the unchanging reality from the deceptive appearances of the senses. Plato's allegory of the cave, presented in his work The Republic, vividly illustrates this Eleatic influence. In the allegory, prisoners in a cave perceive shadows on the wall, believing them to be the only reality. However, one prisoner escapes and discovers the outside world, realizing that the shadows are mere reflections of true objects illuminated by the sun. This journey from the cave to the outside world symbolizes the philosopher's ascent from the world of appearances to the world of forms, reflecting the Eleatic quest for true knowledge beyond sensory deception. While Aristotle was deeply influenced by Eleatic thought, his approach to metaphysics diverged significantly from that of his predecessors. Aristotle's critique of the Eleatic principles begins with his rejection of the idea that change and plurality are mere illusions. Instead, Aristotle sought to understand how change and multiplicity could be reconciled with the concept of being. This led him to develop his theory of substance and his exploration of the causes and principles underlying reality. In his work Metaphysics, Aristotle introduces the concept of substance as the fundamental reality that underlies all change and diversity. For Aristotle, substances are individual entities that possess both form and matter. The form represents the essence or nature of the substance, while the matter represents the potential for change. This distinction allows Aristotle to account for both the permanence and change observed in the natural world, bridging the gap between the Eleatic and empirical views of reality. Furthermore, Aristotle's doctrine of the four causes provides a comprehensive framework for understanding the nature of being. These causes, material, formal, efficient, and final, explain the existence and changes of substances. The material cause. This is the primordial substance, the cosmic dust from which all forms emerge. It is the essence of matter, the raw potentiality awaiting its destiny. In our ethereal journey, the material cause is the stardust, the very fabric of the universe, from which celestial bodies and life itself spring forth. The formal cause. Here, we encounter the celestial blueprint, the divine pattern that shapes the raw material into its destined form. It is the ethereal design, the cosmic code that orchestrates harmony and order. Imagine the intricate constellations that guide travelers through the night sky, symbolizing the formal cause in our ethereal realm. The efficient cause. This is the driving force, the celestial energy that breathes life into the cosmos. It is the movement, the catalyst of change, akin to the gentle push of a solar wind propelling a starship on its voyage. The efficient cause is the divine hand, the unseen force guiding the transformation of the universe. The final cause. It is the cosmic destiny, the ethereal fulfillment of existence's potential. In our mystical universe, the final cause is the journey's end, the enlightenment sought by every soul wandering the infinite expanse. By analyzing the causes of change, Aristotle addresses the Eleatic challenge of reconciling the unchanging nature of being with the observable changes in the world. His emphasis on empirical observation and logical analysis reflects a departure from the purely rational approach of the Eleatics, offering a more integrated view of reality. Chapter 5, Transition to Pluralism, the Eleatic Influence on Plato and Aristotle. The one and the many are a mystery. Plato. Our journey through the Eleatic School and its profound impact on ancient philosophy now leads us to a crucial transition, the shift from the monistic worldview of the Eleatics to the pluralistic perspectives of later philosophers. In this chapter, we will explore how the Eleatic influence, particularly through the works of Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus, laid the groundwork for the pluralistic philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. This transition marks a pivotal moment in the history of thought, as the search for the nature of reality expanded from the singular to the manifold. The subject of this chapter centers on the Eleatic influence on Plato and Aristotle and how their engagement with Eleatic principles facilitated the emergence of pluralism. Both philosophers grappled with the Eleatic emphasis on the unchanging, eternal nature of being, while simultaneously recognizing the diversity and change evident in the empirical world. The core problem they addressed was reconciling the Eleatic monism with the observable plurality and transformation in nature. To formulate the problem, we must understand how Plato and Aristotle, while deeply influenced by Eleatic thought, each proposed solutions that integrated the insights of monism with the realities of a pluralistic world. Their works demonstrate a synthesis of Eleatic and pluralistic elements, paving the way for subsequent philosophical developments and the evolution of metaphysical thought. Plato's philosophy is a remarkable synthesis of Eleatic monism and pluralism. While he was heavily influenced by Parmenides' assertion of an unchanging reality, Plato also recognized the existence of multiplicity and change in the empirical world. This dual recognition led to his theory of forms, where he posited a realm of perfect, unchanging forms or ideas that underlie the mutable physical world. According to Plato, these forms represent the true essence of reality, while the material world is a mere shadow of this higher reality. The influence of Eleatic monism is evident in Plato's insistence on the eternal and unchanging nature of the forms. Like Parmenides, Plato believed that true knowledge could only be attained through reason, not sensory perception. The forms are accessible only through intellectual insight, representing a stable and unchanging reality that stands in contrast to the fluctuating world of appearances. This dualistic framework echoes the Eleatic separation of being from becoming, highlighting the influence of Eleatic thought on Plato's metaphysics. However, Plato also addressed the plurality and change evident in the physical world. In his dialogues, particularly in Timaeus, Plato explores the process of creation and the role of the demiurge, a divine craftsman who shapes the material world according to the patterns of the forms. This acknowledgement of the material world's diversity and transformation reflects a departure from strict Eleatic monism, integrating pluralistic elements into his philosophical system. By synthesizing the insights of Eleatic monism with the empirical realities of plurality and change, Plato laid the groundwork for a more comprehensive understanding of reality. Aristotle's critique and expansion of Eleatic principles. Aristotle, a student of Plato, further developed and expanded upon Eleatic principles, offering a nuanced critique that incorporated pluralistic elements. Unlike Plato, Aristotle rejected the existence of a separate realm of forms, instead positing that form and matter are inseparable aspects of substances in the natural world. This shift from Plato's dualism to Aristotle's hylomorphism marks a significant development in the transition from Eleatic monism to pluralism. In his work Metaphysics, Aristotle introduces the concept of substance as the fundamental reality that underlies all change and diversity. Substances are individual entities composed of both form and matter, allowing them to undergo change while retaining their essential nature. This approach reconciles the Eleatic emphasis on the unchanging nature of being with the observable changes in the empirical world. Aristotle's theory of substance provides a framework for understanding the continuity and change in nature, bridging the gap between monism and pluralism. Furthermore, Aristotle's doctrine of the four causes, material, formal, efficient, and final, offers a comprehensive explanation of the existence and changes of substances. This causal framework addresses the Eleatic challenge of reconciling the unchanging nature of being with the dynamic processes observed in the natural world. By analyzing the causes and principles underlying change, Aristotle integrates the Eleatic commitment to rational inquiry with a recognition of the plurality and complexity of reality. His emphasis on empirical observation and logical analysis represents a departure from the purely rational approach, of the Eleatics, offering a more integrated and pluralistic view of reality. The legacy and transformation of Eleatic thought. The transition from Eleatic monism to pluralism in the works of Plato and Aristotle marks a pivotal moment in the history of philosophy. The Eleatic emphasis on the unchanging, eternal nature of reality profoundly influenced both thinkers, shaping their metaphysical inquiries and laying the foundation for their philosophical systems. However, their engagement with Eleatic principles also led to significant transformations, as they integrated these insights with the empirical realities of plurality and change. Plato's theory of forms represents a synthesis of Eleatic monism and pluralism, positing a realm of perfect, unchanging forms that underlie the mutable physical world. This dualistic framework reflects the influence of Eleatic thought while also addressing the diversity and transformation evident in nature. Similarly, Aristotle's theory of substance and his causal framework offer a nuanced critique of Eleatic principles, reconciling the unchanging nature of being with the dynamic processes observed in the empirical world. As we conclude our exploration of the Eleatic influence on Plato and Aristotle, we recognize the enduring significance of Eleatic thought in the development of Western philosophy. The dialogues and debates sparked by Eleatic principles continue to resonate in contemporary philosophical discussions, inviting us to explore the depths of metaphysical inquiry and seek a deeper understanding of reality. In our next chapter, we will turn our attention to the Pluralist school, which emerged in response to the Eleatic challenges and offered new perspectives on the nature of being and reality. Conclusion. The Eleatic school stands as a testament to the power of philosophical inquiry and the pursuit of deeper truths. Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus challenged us to question the very nature of reality, pushing the boundaries of thought and laying the groundwork for future metaphysical exploration. As we reflect on the profound insights of the Eleatic philosophers, we are reminded of the timeless relevance of their questions and the enduring quest for knowledge. The Eleatics invite us to look beyond the surface, to seek the underlying unity and permanence that define our existence. Until we meet again, may your journey be filled with wonder and discovery. Explore our other videos on philosophy and meditation, and continue your journey of self-discovery and inner peace. For in the timeless wisdom of the ancients, we find the threads that connect us to the very fabric of the universe.